Okay, so today I'm going to talk about something a little different. Now, I am filming this. Obviously, I am, as you can tell by the assemblies in the back there, I am pretty much in the middle of my build on the MiniArt US tow truck G506. This really cool 1/35th scale kit. But while I was working on that, I thought, this is really coming out well so far. How about add a driver figure? So today, I'm going to talk about doing a driver figure for your hobby kit. Now, I will say right in the beginning, I don't pretend to be an expert at painting the figures or miniatures, however you want to call them, but just going to try to do a simple treatment and get a hopefully pretty decent result out of it. So that's the perspective, as usual, practical, because that's one of my favorite words. So to start with, so I'll move this aside. I was in my local hobby store. Yes, once again, the benefit of paying a visit and supporting your local hobby store. And I actually I had to buy some surface primer because mine ran out for the MiniArt build. And while I was in there, they had a whole stack of these 1/35th figure kits, which is one of the great things about working in 1/35th scale. The enthusiast, typically military preferred scale, is that there are several manufacturers, MiniArt, Tamiya. I'm sure there are a few others that I'm losing off the top of my mind at the moment, but they all make these accessory figure kits, and they're usually on some kind of a theme. US Army Drivers. I showed one when I did the Panther build that was, literally a Panther tank crew. And this one, I saw US Army Drivers, but I saw this guy in particular, and I thought, coveralls are coveralls. If I spray this guy in white and do a black wash on him, it should look like he's, an old school mechanic in his coveralls, and that would be pretty time appropriate for this truck that I'm building for MiniArt. So I walked out the store and I had to get it. Inside here, well, let me just flip it over so you can see a little bit better how these things are usually packaged. There's sprue designations. Each sprue is for that particular figure. They give you a rundown of the paint, so if you want to reproduce exactly as they are, you can follow that. Inside the box, because they are just a couple of figures, there is no big parts layout. Here we have, and I still have them in their plastic, obviously, 4 of the other figures, but I did take out the sprue for the one that I am looking to do. And if we can zoom in here nice and tight, you can see the detail on this figure is really great. It is split up: torso, legs, arms, head, hat. You may think, really, you couldn't mold it in one pass, but it's actually good that it is done this way, because if you're doing what I'm doing, which is where you're building, and you've already assembled a cab area or a seating area where, in this case, a driver is going to go, you don't have to try to fit a static whole figure in there. You can put him in piece by piece, glue him in spot, and build him up after he's all painted. So that's what I'm going to do. And being that this is from MiniArt, one of the what's called upper tier model manufacturers, you can see the mold is very clean. There's very little cleanup here, just a little flash, some of these little injector remnants. So I'm going to clean those off. I'm going to hit this guy with some of my Mr. Surface light gray primer, hit him with some flat white, do the detail painting, a wash, and put him in the vehicle. So I'm going to do that. Now, just as a little aside, when I was in my early to mid to later teens, my teen years, I guess you could just say. My brother and our friends, we were into all sorts of strategy games, tactical games, if names like Avalon Hill and things like that ring a bell. Yes, we were there playing those games, but we were also pretty big on fantasy role-playing, specifically a game called RuneQuest from a company called the Chaosium, which, not as a commercial, but just if you're interested, I believe they're supposed to be reissuing it on online. So the best, without a doubt, the absolute best medieval combat system, fantasy combat system, but just my opinion. However, to play the game, we had these miniatures we would paint. Now, this one that I'm showing you, and this is why I am bringing this one out, this was a standing swordsman with his arm out with one sword and the shield on this arm. I took the figure completely apart, and it was a metal figurine, so I cut him apart and I reworked the limb attachments to get him into this pose. I managed to separate the shield off his arm, put that on his back, and these were little slices off his shoulder that, using a needle nose, I flattened and shaped into armor plates, as well as his throat guard there. I took a sword from another figure, attached everything, and painted him up, even added a little turf to his base. So pretty cool. So again, point being, in terms of needs to modify, when the guy, your figure, male, female, whatever, comes in pieces like this, you can work these attachment points. So if you need to put a little bevel to situate something a little bit differently, you are in a much better position to do that with the figure in its dissection here, rather than coming as one glop of a molding. Plus, too, the molding detail you can get by having the parts separate is, of course, far superior than what you could do on one solid piece. Unfortunately, I've looked, there don't really seem to be many people, or anybody really, because I haven't found any, making figures like this for 1/24th, 1/25th scale builds. So I would love to see that, because it's nice once in a while putting a figure into a vehicle, not just to, give it that diorama feel, but I've talked before in other builds, it is nice to do things in different scales relative to each other so that you can appreciate the size of some vehicles in relation, such as when I did the AMT dump truck, my big boy up there, next to VW Rabbit, which was this guy right here. You really get a feel for how vehicles compare in reality when you're dealing with, the motor parts and the things you don't normally see when you pull up next to one. So having a human figure to put in greatly reinforces and gives an immediacy to the idea of the proportion of the vehicle, whatever it may be that you're building, in relation to a human. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to get to it, and I will be back after doing some painting. Alrighty. Once again, as always, thank you for watching, subscribing, liking, sharing. Please do hit that alarm button, subscribe, the whole YouTube deal, as I always like to say. So with that note, now I will get going. All right, so went and did my spray painting using the aforementioned Tamiya Surface Primer L in light gray. And I found a can I had of Testors flat white. And I have to say, the combined effect worked out really well. So I'm hoping the camera catches all the shading on this, but at this point, I don't even think a wash is necessary because the way the primer found its way in there and the white over it, there's already all the kind of shadow and everything that I would have wanted on those coveralls as it is. So I can go right into doing some detail painting, which will mainly consist, again, because I wanted to keep this relatively straightforward with this figure treatment. We have some boots, we have a belt, obviously his hands, his face. Let's see if the light captures that a little bit better. His face might do a little bit of wash around there to bring out some of the details, and by wash I mean Tamiya brown panel liner. Again, keeping life simple. And then obviously on the back of the head, we have to do that in flesh color. And then his hat, which this is the front of it with the bill turned up. So I might look through my decals and see if I have some kind of decal, maybe on his shoulder, something from like an oil company or something like that, and see, make it look a little bit more like a workman's uniform, or maybe even on the back, although actually I don't think that will even be seen. So gonna do that little bit of detail painting, and then we can take this guy off the sprue and see about fitting him into the cab. Alrighty. Okay, so detail painting is done. Now I had hoped to capture the painting while I was actually doing it, but just as I have encountered building the 135th MiniArt truck that I have here in the background, as you can see, work is progressing on that. Same I found with the figure. I guess my eyesight, call it what you will, but I found it very difficult to paint and leave space for the camera and have it close enough that I could see what I was doing. Some of it I also had to break out my jeweler's headset there to get a little better vision on some of the smaller details, which is something I don't often resort to, but wanted to put that little bit extra in this, and because some of the detailing was rather small, and also, again, this may have been my eyes, but the way the light was capturing the texture of the parts with the white and the shadow of the undercoat, my eyes just were not working so great. So the painting is done. Now I have lined up everything I used here, which may seem like a lot to get this, what you could call fairly basic treatment, and we'll take a closer look at this in a moment, but I just figured I'd explain what each color went into. This is all stuff I had on my paint shelf that went into doing this. So, and each color, really, it was just a dab here, a dab there, but working out to bring up some detail. So I have here Flat Earth. This became the driver's boots. AK Rubber Black. This became the soles of the boots. This light sea gray XF25 became the, I guess, stitching seam or joining seam, whatever you want to call it, on the side of the pants and the sleeves and the inside of the collar. Got some olive drab green, XF74. A lot of these you can tell are from Tamiya for the darker color of his hat, followed by a good old-fashioned Testors flat green for the inside fold of the hat. XF15 flat flesh, hands, face, obviously. NATO brown XF68. This is where I whipped out the jeweler's glasses, and that was to do the eyebrows. Just very simple with a very fine, which did I use here? Where's my friend here? My 5.0 brush, and you can see that is a fine tip. Then flat white XF2 for some touch-ups, and then we get to the stuff that when you're doing these things really makes the difference. So brown Tamiya panel line accent brown. I used my 5.0 brush and just very carefully, in rather small amounts, worked onto the head and the hands to bring up the shadows of the facial features. I hope the camera is catching this. It will be perhaps better to note this once he goes together. In any event, it brings out the shadows on the face, between the fingers, in the hands. You know, it really does a marvel to take what looks like a paint by number scheme, say like if you just put on a flesh color and done a hair color and that was it. It doesn't really give that like depth, I guess you could say, to the color and the color gradations you would see on a normal human face. And it also will not bring out some of the detail that is molded into the piece. So just like on car engines, when you do that accent liner, you know, wash, basically all of a sudden all this detail and relief just, you know, pops into being. You know, we can see on the engine for the MiniArt truck that I'm building, you know, how much of a difference that makes. And I've shown in quite a few videos, just that extra bit makes a world of difference. Black I used for the boots. It also darkens down a little bit the color that I used for the boots, and along the belt buckle itself I did with my Gundam marker. And then last but not least, you see these two decals on here. I was just looking for something that could bring a little bit of extra detail and pop to this figure. So I thought, you know what? I'm trying to do like a mechanic, so to speak, an old school mechanic. And I thought, oh, maybe this guy has some patches on his coveralls. These decals were extras from the Hasegawa MR2 that I built. Always save your excess decals. You never know when they come in handy or for what purpose. Could be something completely different than you had intended, as I've shown using some of my spare Gundam markers, Gundam decals, I'm sorry, on kits for a number of reasons, as warning labels, whatever. Completely different application, but it works. Now these decals, I honestly could not tell you what they were supposed to signify on that Hasegawa MR2 kit, but because they are so small that you can't really read them, it works just fine at 1/35th scale on this guy's work jacket. So there they are, and I thought that'll look pretty neat with the arms when he's actually assembled, to give that little extra something. I had originally thought to put them on the shoulders of his arm pieces, but I wasn't 100% sure how those at this point are going to line up on his body. And I wanted to make sure if they were like shoulder patches, that they, you know, I didn't want them to be uneven between the two arms, then that would have looked silly. So I put it on the breast pockets of his top of his uniform, and that works just fine. Of course, mark fit for tiny decals like that, especially on the uneven surface of his coverall, indispensable. And then because they are decals and they will have a bit of a shine to them, and everything here is flat in reflectivity. There we go. Got my tongue untied. Just put some Acryl flat clear over those decals. This will dull them down and will also protect them from drying out and flaking off. So now all of that I did last night. Took me maybe about an hour to do this detail painting. You know, it's nothing big or fancy. It's just a matter of having a fine brush like a 5.0, and like I've said in I don't know how many videos, you over builds you will develop a color palette from paints you've accumulated and just go into your stash and pulling out what seems to work and pulling out the detail that you are looking to achieve. So now that the painting is done, I'm going to clip this guy out, put him together, get him into the cab of the truck, and then put his arms on, and he's all done. Well, it was a real tight fit getting him in there, but he is in there, and he's looking pretty cool. His hat popped off, but I was able to sneak that in through the rear window and wedge it on top of his head against the roof liner. I used cyanoacrylate to stick him in, because it was a little tricky, and once I had him in spot, I was able to just wiggle him a little bit towards what would be the driver's door and reach in and get some glue under his keister, and he's in place. So now I'm going to reach in there and do the arms. It's probably just about impossible to see here, but his right foot is, believe it or not, on the gas pedal. His left foot's hanging in space a little bit, but well, what can you do? I will settle with how he's coming out. So, pretty cool. All right, let's get those arms on. Okay, so I got his driver's side arm on. Again, I'd like to show this on camera, but trying to get my head in there, and my fingers in there, and the tweezers in there, and the glue in there, I just don't have enough working space. But the arm just went on. I did settle his hand on the steering wheel, which hopefully I can get the light on, which I think gives it a really nice realistic look. And also it's great the way it's molded. The figure is in multi-piece that can kind of jiggle with how that arm sits on his torso, so that hand rests right on the wheel. So that's really nice. So now I'm going to put his left arm on, and he'll be good to go. Be right back. So here we go. Now we have his left arm is on, as I showed on the steering wheel, and right arm was a little tricky to get in there, obviously, because I'm reaching in from the side of the cab. Had to do a little reach in from the back window there. Of course, my fingers didn't fit through, so I was using the back end of a brush and tweezers, and I will admit, this arm came out of the cab a couple of times before I was able to get it seated and bonded, even using the instant cyanoacrylate. But he's all in there, and he's all set. He's ready to drive away. So, going to do a little touch-up paint on those shoulder seams. I did put a few nicks on his uniform there with my tweezer, but looking pretty cool. Alrighty. Okay, so here we go. Now the truck is done, as I showed in the build video for the MiniArt truck. But since we're talking about adding figures, let's take a look at our buddy inside this nifty vehicle. Now, as I showed, I did not do any kind of super crazy detail painting for him. It was fairly basic, but in his final presence inside there, he's looking pretty good. So, and I think, as you may find if you're doing figures, adding figures to your builds, you know, in the final presence, unless it's, you know, a figure standing outside of a vehicle, but as long as they are in a vehicle, a driver, passenger, tank commander, you know, whatever the case may be, you can do some detail that will be seen, but a lot of it will not. Just the presence of the figure itself in your subject matter will do what you need to do to impart that little bit of realism, and definitely a sense of scale as the giant finger of assembly comes in here. So that's working with figures. You know, it's a little something you can add, and with these figure packages like the one I showed here, you know, you're amortizing, let's say, your cost of the pack over the number of figures in there. So really, for this one driver figure, it was a couple of dollars to add them to the kit, and I think that's a pretty huge return for the investment, strictly in terms of dollars, if that's the way it is to be evaluated. But of course, in detail, far more. So there we go. So hope you enjoyed this little bit. Show you something, once again, a little bit different. So going to get started with another build. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Please do like, subscribe, hit the alert button, all that good YouTube stuff, and I will see you for the next build. So in the meantime, enjoy your hobby. Alrighty.